Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here. This is going to be my final 11.1 Liberation of Undermine raid comp. You can call it a tier list or update, whatever, similar to the one that that I put out a few weeks ago. We're going to be hitting on tanks, healers, DPS, basically everything, and trying to build what is going to be hopefully the comp or as close to the comp you see in a World First setting. But yeah, I could be right, could be wrong. We'll figure it out. So I have asked Jack for some help with healers a little bit, just a very brief, hey, what looks good in the raid still? This is what he told me. When we get to that, to a similar extent, I asked Dr. Atnos about rogues. So if you're a rogue and he's wrong, hate him, don't hate me. But yeah, so I want to get into tanks first here, obviously, and it's important to keep in mind raid utility, raid buffs, all that stuff, because unfortunately it is a world we live in. Raid buffs are still a thing, for better or worse. It is what it is. Now, as far as tanks are concerned, I mean, honestly, you have 6 obviously here: Guardian, Prot Warrior, Prot Paladin, Brewmaster, Vengeance, and Blood DK. I feel like the front runners are Prot Paladin, Brewmaster, and Blood DK. Vengeance is not bad either, but I feel like the front runners are just more or less these 3 here. As far as like Guardian's concerned, I mean, like, you're going to have Mark of the Wild from probably a Resto Druid, or, spoilers ahead, a Boomkin or a Feral Druid, right? It's not a tier where you're playing Guardian from Mark and the other specs suck, right? And also, I haven't seen much about Guardians over the course of PTR, a whole lot being exceptionally strong. I mean, they're obviously an option in like in a more higher world first raid comp setting. I feel like Guardian is just not going to be where most look this tier. Now, Prot Warrior has been doing a lot of damage. I think more on the M plus end of the spectrum. I'm not sure where they're at in more of a raid comp damage based setting. If they are still pretty high, that's a bit more of a plus and benefit to them. And Vengeance also has been doing pretty solid in M plus and things of the sort. But I think when it comes to raid comp and raid buffs and things being taken more into account, it's likely Prot Paladin, Brewmaster, and Blood DK. Now you've got Brewmaster here bringing Mystic Touch, right? The monk debuff, 5% more damage taken, melee damage, so on and so forth. Blood DK being strong in general, just based on how like their tanking profile. Brewmaster as well, being solid when it comes to stagger mitigation, so on and so forth. I mean, Blood DK does indeed bring AMZ. If you need like mass grip, they can bring that too. They bring just general grips in the first place, and have a lot of like solid niche utility if needed, right? Prot Paladin also been pretty strong during testing. A lot of, I mean, blessings, all that kind of stuff, give or take. A lot of a semi-niche utility, but just solid in general all around. When it comes to overall tank comp, though, I feel like it's probably going to be more of like a Brewmaster Blood tier. I did say Brewmaster Prot Paladin tier, but I think when it comes to DKs, if you're trying to work one into your raid comp, they don't have like a raid buff, right? You don't need to bring one for Mystic Touch or Chaos Brand, but if you're trying to work a DK into your raid comp, just in general, AMZ is still strong. It's sort of a lesser raid CD in a sense. If you need Gorfian's Grasp or Death Grip, obviously they're going to be relevant. I'm going to lean a bit more towards like Brewmaster and Blood DK, but at the same time, you could do like Prot Paladin and Blood DK. I think a lot of that is because Unholy and Frost just haven't been exceptionally strong DPS wise. I do, for the most part, think you want a Blood DK or a DK somewhere in your raid comp. I'm going to go with, I'm probably just putting Blood up here somewhere, mostly due to like comp restrictions. Then probably a mix of like Prot and Brew. Once again, Windwalker's solid this tier. They are oversimming a little bit, but even with the oversimming, they're still look to be relatively strong in the raid. You can probably play both here, but I'm going to probably lean a bit more towards playing Prot Paladin, but Brew is definitely very strong, stagger negation, all that. And with that being said, I'm going to sort of say you might have Windwalker in for a lot of fights here too. But honestly, I think these are interchangeable a good bit depending on your comp. You could easily see Prot Paladin over Brewmaster, or Brew over Prot, depending where you want to go with things. But I'm going to say it's Prot Paladin, and, we'll go from there. Now, as far as healers are concerned, I did ask Jack a little bit about this, because I'm not as up on healers as he is, obviously. Disc has gone through a lot of changes over the past few weeks. I think he got some nerfs a couple days ago as well. I heard him complaining about it, and, you get nerfed. Sort of sucks. With that being said, I believe Disc, and he says as well, that the comp really hasn't changed a whole lot since the last video, for the most part. I think a lot of it's just due to like Resto Shaman, Holy Paladin, Prez just sort of being mid and not getting enough changes and or buffs, nerfs, whatever. I don't know what's the... I haven't really seen any of these recently in testing in general. Obviously, raid testing ended a month and a half ago, whatever it was, give or take, but I haven't really seen many in plus either. But when it comes to more raid comp stuff, it does, from what I understand, still look like Disc, Holy, probably a Mistweaver, and a Resto Druid. Disc and Holy obviously bringing Million Dispels, Fort, PIs to your DPS, which is strong. Disc with its like unique or healing profile. DPS brain, sorry about that. Holy and Mistweaver, obviously I've heard a lot about Mistweaver this tier, bringing a lot of raw throughput and healing. They had been nerfed a little bit. I think they were nerfed, I think it was a 6% nerf, I believe, like 3 or 4 days ago, last week, I think on Friday. But from what I understand, they're still pretty strong. They do indeed bring Mystic Touch if you need that. You probably have a Windwalker in somewhere, but if not, Mistweaver can indeed provide that, which is nice to have around. Obviously, raid buffs are important. And Resto Druid with its healing profile, a bit of niche utility, obviously having Innervate. I believe Mass Root can be good as well on fights like Muggsy, rooting the bombs on Mythic and maybe even Heroic, depending where that goes, plus bringing Mark the Wild, which is very, very strong. And it feels like for the most part, I'm not a healer by any means. I healed in Kata, that's basically it. But it does feel like this healing comp does complement one another pretty well. Jack did mention there's possibility, at least earlier on, for like double disc one holy, or sorry, double disc no holy and all that. But I feel like with things shifting around a bit and what he said more recently, it looks like this is probably going to be more or less where things land, give or take. Now, when it comes to Resto Shaman, Pres Evoker, and Holy Paladin, I'm not sure how their healing profiles match up comparatively to other specs this tier. I think it's a whole lot, but what I have heard, man, they're just not that strong. Holy Paladin, I believe Ellesmere is talking about it, received I think a 4% buff either Friday or a couple days ago, give or take, but still not looking incredibly strong. Resto, to a similar extent, also being in a bit of an odd spot. They do bring Sky Fury, but you're probably going to have an Ellie Shaman or Enhanced Shaman somewhere in your raid comp, spoilers ahead. And as far as Prez is concerned, I mean, they're obviously not as strong as they were in Nerebar Palace, with stat healing and all that. A lot of niche utility when it comes to Blessing of the Bronze. They're, like raid buff in a sense, but I think you're still going to have some Augs and or Devs in your DPS comp as well. Taking all that into account, plus their general healing and where it's been, it does indeed, from what I've heard and seen, look like Disc, Holy Mistweaver, and Resto probably rounding out your healer core if you're running 4. Let's hope there's not a 3 heal fight. Let's hope, honestly, there's not a 5 heal fight, and we're going to just, sort of go with that for healing comp. Now, when it comes to DPS, I've placed them all down here. I don't have room for Warlock or Warrior. Buff Warlock, I'll put them down when we get to it. But I'm going to move the classes up here. I think we're probably going to see play in the actual raid comp. And I'll leave ones down here that maybe need to be hit on a bit later on. Maybe like outside looking in, or maybe multiples. We'll talk about it as we go. Now, as far as DK is concerned, when it comes to Unholy and Frost, they've been buffed a handful of times over the course of PTR. I believe they got, a 4 or 6% aura buff, I think, on Friday. And as far as I know about Frost DK's profile, I've heard a lot about, it's even been looking last year like in Nerebar Palace, a lot of like stat cleave value with Breath of Central Ghost, the CDs, all that. You saw it on Brood Twister when you had augmentation evokers. I think there's one in Brood Twister, I think last year, empowering Frost DKs in their breath CDs when those spider ads spawn with the maggots running around, all that kind of stuff. They needed to be blown up quickly, but a bit more of like a sustained AoE profile through the duration of breath. Now, I don't feel like there's a whole lot of fights this tier that really want that. Styx is going to be a bit more like burst stacked AoE if need be. When it comes to reverb, to a similar extent, they got to be burst down pretty fast, and breath could be used for that, I suppose, but I feel like there are classes like BM Hunter and Warlock and just other meat grinder classes that are probably better than that. Maybe on Galliwix, depending on how things look, but we'll figure that out when we get there. Strong CDs in breath, I've heard they're pretty inconsistent outside of breath, not bringing the best profile without major CDs. And honestly, as far as Unholy is concerned too, I mean, if you need like grips and they're like insane tankiness, if you need like another AMZ or whatever, it's possible. Like maybe you just want to throw a second DK in here somewhere, but I feel like Unholy and Frost might be on the outside looking in. It's like, hey, maybe it's a blood DK tier. If you need grip or Gorfane's Rasp, they're in. They have their own AMZ. They still can't die. All DKs, even though blood obviously tank. I feel like I'm gonna leave both these on the outside looking in. Probably not part of like the DPS comp now, but it's a possibility. Maybe if you want grips or the utility, they could be. When it comes to Havoc, I'm throwing Havoc in here. We're gonna put it in the tank section. They were obviously doing exceptionally strong funnel a week and a half ago or so with their AoE. I forgot the name of the ability, but it was bugged and double dipping essentially. I think it was called Thrill of the Fight, maybe. I could be wrong there, not really sure. It was double dipping, I believe. They fixed that. They fixed the actual mastery, I think, as well, double dipping. I could be wrong, but I read it notes. I don't play Demon Hunter a whole lot, but regardless, you want them for Chaos Brand. The damage seems fine. Demon Hunter profile has been, stat cleave profile. It seemed fine as a single target. Once again, also, relatively hard to die, decent bit of niche utility, Chaos Brand being very important. Unfortunately, they had the debuff of being a Havoc Demon Hunter and just randomly doing a backflip and killing somebody in your raid. 4 IQ. By the way, jokes aside, I think you're going to see a Havoc in the raid, obviously Chaos Brand. If you have a Vengeance in for whatever reason, you could, but you're going with the debuff, so that is that. Now, as far as balance is concerned, I don't think I threw Feral on here, but there should be, obviously. We'll throw Feral up here, just both in mention right now. You're gonna probably see a Resto Druid, I would assume, as far as healer comp's concerned. But at the same time, if you want to slot another healer in for whatever reason, there's more of an option to do that, because Balance and Feral this tier are strong. Balance brings that Starfall profile. I mean, they're just spread AoE. It's been strong. Fights like 6 Bunk Junker, like Rick Reverb, a couple other fights here and there. You can use that profile, One Arm Bandit as well. They've been strong in testing. Niche utility, also bringing Mark of the Wild. If you're not playing a Resto Druid or a Feral, Balance could be in there. I think Balance is a class where you might just see like a Feral Druid if you're not playing a Resto on maybe like more fights. Maybe one or the other. But when you want like a more specific profile, I think you could probably see a Balance Druid probably brought in like two Balance Druids, maybe on like Sticks or One Arm Bandit, or maybe even Rick Reverb if you want like that just cleave profile they bring passively, right? So it's a class I think you'll probably see like a mix of Feral and Balance in the raid depending on what you're doing. Feral, I understand, is a bit better in single target. I don't know the actual sims on both, but on a fight like Sprocket Monger, if you want a Druid in for whatever reason, maybe no Resto, Feral most likely, but Balance at the same time. A lot of fights being spread cleave, some of them earlier, still that Starfall profile could be pretty solid, and maybe even you want to on later fights, looking at like Gallywix, depending how it is and how important and relevant the ads are. So I'm gonna toss like probably just Balance up here, but at the same time, I think these change a bit depending on the fight, but there's a possibility of having both. I'm gonna put Balance back down here as well. I can find a Balance Druid to be mentioned later on in like the, hey, maybe double up spot. So Feral possibly. Certain fights, they are pretty solid. Their damage is good in single target as well as AoE. Yeah, if you get a mark, they can bring that too. Devastation and Og are very odd. So Og was nerfed. They nerfed Shifting Sands by 20%. They nerfed Breath of Aeons, I think, from 10% accumulation to 7. And I think they nerfed Clutchmates from like 25 to 10. But the thing is, those are more like M+ nerfs. Like, obviously, Breath is relevant in a raid setting. People are CDing and lusting, sure. And like, sure, Shifting Sands is relevant in a raid setting to it as well. Like, the Clutchmates nerf is what, hit Og a lot more in plus too. They still have that damage amplification profile, like we talked about with the Frost Decay. If you wanted that on Brood Twister last year, you could bring an Og in and make Frost Decay in that profile even better. There are a lot of fights this raid tier that sort of want these semi-niche but still good damage profiles, like Warlock, for example, or like Balance Druid, like we were talking about a minute ago with that spread cleave profile. You don't want it on every fight, but some fights you want those profiles, and they're more relevant than they have been, I feel like, on average last year. Now, it's interesting because Dev has received a handful of buffs too, and their profile is not horrendous. They bring a lot of utility as well. That like single target stack cleave profile, not incredibly strong in spread cleave when it comes to like, One Arm Bandit, so on and so forth. And that, range limitation, obviously a little frustrating. I'm going to toss like 2 Augs here. I don't know if you're playing to. I mean, honestly, I could see a world where you just play a Dev if you don't need Augs damage amp profile. I don't know where they're sitting like damage value wise in a raid setting comparatively to M+, but I think it's a decent chance you still see an Og somewhere. Plus, I mean, you do want Blessing of the Bronze, probably for the most part somewhere. Probably one of the lesser required raid buffs overall, but it's still there. I'm going to toss them in here to fill this group out, and with an asterisk next to the name. Asterix next to their name. It could be a Dev as well, but who knows, Hunter, I mean, honestly, I heard Marx's AoE is good, but you just play BM, man. BM is one of the classes. They overbuffed BM a couple days ago. It's like 2.8 million sim or something like that. Every spell you cast is on the move. You can cast for free infinitely. You're a ranged DPS. If you're going to stack one class this tier, it was Warrior, I feel like. You're just stacking BM Hunters. Like, they're just ridiculous. They overbuffed them. They overbuffed them and then realized it and nerfed them a bit, but still overbuffed them. They went from like, I think it was like, I could be wrong on the numbers here. I think it was like 2.55 sim to like 2.9 with the initial nerfs that came into their tier set, but aura buffs, and they changed the tier and nerfed it even more an hour later. I think their sim is like 2.75 or something like that now. They're the highest range DPS by a long shot. They have no castable spells. Everything's just backflips, 360 no scopes. You're jumping every button for free. You play BM Hunters, probably stack them on most fights. I'm going to put 2 BMs here. I'm a little jealous if you haven't figured that out. They don't have like an amazing spread cleave profile, but they look solid in single target, look solid in AoE, consistent damage profile as well. So we're tossing both these here. I'll put them over here, I guess, on the stacking end of the spectrum. But if you're stacking a ranged DPS, it's got to be BM, I would say, at this point, this tier. Maybe it's a bit of a reach, but honestly, I don't know. I don't really think so. Moving on from there, you have mages. I mean, Someone mentioned to me that it might be an arcane tier in chat. I don't know if that's like a troll or not. I'm gonna toss one mage in here, probably just fire, frost, and arcane. Whatever's good. It's probably interchangeable. Obviously, you want arcane intellect in the raid. They can't die. They have infinite utility. Whatever you want. You know, fire, frost, arcane. I haven't heard anything about arcane recently until like that was mentioned yesterday. So if things are changing, throw it down below in the comment section. Tell me why. So I actually don't really know a lot about that. I haven't looked at it a whole lot, but I'm gonna throw mage in here. Obviously you want AI. It's possible maybe you play two depending on the fight and things, but I feel like their profile is strong. The DPS is solid, a lot of utility, but I almost feel like, and I'm sort of afraid to say this, but I feel like the classes that have the niche but more relevant profiles at times, like Destro Lock with spread cleave or Boonkin with like Starfall cleave and things in certain fights or whatever. I don't know if mage is one of them, but they're so good. I'm gonna put one here, possibly play two, depending where it goes, whether it's Fire, Frost, or Arcane or changeable. There you go. Windwalker, I mean, you can play Windwalker if you're not playing Brewmaster and for whatever reason don't have a Mistweaver. You're going to want Mystic Touch for the 5% damage increase to melee damage, all that. If you already have a Brewmaster or a Mistweaver in, they're probably on the outside looking in. They're not bad. From what I've heard, I believe their single target's pretty strong. They are over simming, from what I've heard right now. I believe they're one of the higher DPS overall when it comes to like melee sims. They are capped at AoE with like spinning crane kick and things, but at the same time, a lot of fights this tier, like Styx, Reverb, and the other like stack cleave fights, honestly, they're not stacking like 20 mobs at once. Like Windwalker could be pretty strong in those fights too. I think they're on the higher end here, like of the outside looking in. Put them with balance up here as well, and come back to them in a little while. Rep Paladin, I mean, like they have insane AoE burst. The single target sort of mediocre. Short CDs though, blessings. They can't really die. They're solid. I don't think they bring a profile that's incredibly desirable. You could see one, but I don't think like they're just short CD mass AoE profile, I guess burst AoE profile is incredibly sought after this tier, but they're fine. I mean, if you have one in your raid comp and you have like if someone's playing Ret in your raid and you got a spot or two open and they're bringing one on, who cares? Shout out Jack. Shadow Priest, they've been up and down a lot as well. I can see a Shadow in raid. I mean, they bring PI, they bring 4. Obviously, you're playing Priest already. Disc and Holy in your healer comp, very likely. They're not bad. I think they're simming like one of the higher range DPS. I'm pretty sure they've received some tier set nerfs, but some aura buffs to compensate. I think they're around 2.7 million, give or take. And like, they do also have that spread cleave profile with like, Shadow Priest dot base damage profile, whatever it is, similar to like Destro in a sense and all that. So I'm gonna throw one in here as a possibility. I could see them being swapped out for something else in the long run. It's sort of hard to say. I don't think you stack them looking at like how the Destro lock buffs are or how strong balance can be on certain fights or the buffs to BM recently. I don't think they're really like a class you consider stacking, but I probably throw one in here. But they're sort of on the outside looking in. So I'm gonna throw them over here in the group 4 comp and go from there. Rogue is the one of the classes that I don't really mess with a whole lot. I've heard Sub is looking the best in the raid. They've received aura buffs every week for the past month. If you're a rogue, I'm sorry. I feel for you. Hey, unfortunately, Affliction's still stuck in Nerva Palace doing 400k less than everybody else. I understand. But either way, I'm going to throw a rogue in here. Sub Assassination Outlaw. If they're better, swap them in. I mean, play whatever spec you need. Similar to like Fire, Frost, and Arcane. But yeah, I've heard Sub's looking the best in the raid. Might change depending where things go. But same time, hey, throw them in. You also want Trophic Poison. That's good. Rogue, bang. There you go. I'm going to remove these two. But hey, once again. Alien Enhance. So they both received nerfs. I believe the nerfs were more impactful to Enhance. I can try and find what Petco told me. I think he said it was just like a restructuring of their damage overall. Let me see. I'm going to scroll back at my DMs. Higher burst window, slightly lower. They likely buff our tier piece or nerf the old one since two piece is legit right now. So there you go. As far as the Ellie versus Enhance goes, I mean, honestly, I don't know where both are sitting at this point. I know Ellie's been putting out insane damage, but barring Petco, I haven't seen any on PTR in dungeons for the most part recently. Obviously, you want one shaman in your raid somewhere. Sky Fury, Wind Fury for like the melee you have as well. I'm going to throw Enhance in here. There very well could be an Ellie this tier as well, if their damage is still incredibly strong. I don't know where they're sitting currently with the buffs that came in last night, early today. Not a whole lot of like, there's a lot of redundancy applying one Ellie, one Enhance. And technically you could just play one Ellie and no Enhance. They both bring Sky Fury things, right? I'm going to I'm going to toss Enhance in here and put Ellie on the higher end of like possibly here as well and come back to it. But I'm going to toss one Enhance in here and we'll talk about it in a minute as well. The last few DPS, you have AF, Demo, Destro, Arms, and Furry Warrior. I know I said that right, Furry. So when it comes to this stuff here, man, honestly, like you're going to play one Warlock in every fight. It's going to be Destro Lock for the most part. It's like Fire Mage, it's like Mage, like Rogue. You'll probably see a mix of Destro, maybe a AF fight or two, maybe a Demo fight or two, this raid tier. I do think that Warlock is one of the specs that you could stack this raid tier on certain fights. I think you'll see Warlock stacked on some fights this tier, actually, similar to like Balanced Druid, depending where you're at. Fights like One Arm Bandit, fights like Sprocket Monger. If you need 2 gateways for that fight on Mythic, you might see 2, I mean, you'll see 2 locks if you need it there. One Arm Bandit, maybe Sprocket Monger, possibly Rick Reverb, Cauldron of Carnage possibly, which are early fights, but still maybe Gallywix depending where things go, and maybe Muggsy depending on LOS cheese, but I doubt it there. It's still a possibility. So we're going to remove AF and Demo here. They're interchangeable. One of the classes you could stack here and go from there. As far as Arms and Fury go, they nerf Fury's execute by 15%, I believe, yesterday. I think it was 15%, roughly, give or take. I'm going to throw Arms in here. Arms was, I mean, Arms and Fury, almost interchangeable. They're both, I think they're both sitting relatively high as well at this point, still pretty high. Arms was the class that we stacked more in the last tier list. We had 2 Arms Warriors in. We didn't have 2 BMs, and with the buffs that came into BM over the last like 48 hours, I think you probably look at like double BM, double Arms, but fights could dictate where things go. Now, the question is, what is that 20th slot, right? Are you missing any raid buffs here? No, unless I'm crazy. I don't believe so here, right? Yeah, you know, you're missing a couple of things here and there. Obviously, you have Hunter for Hunter's Mark. We didn't hit on that, but, you know, you have 2. So there's that. And honestly, like I said, Balanced Druid, you could just see a Feral too. Feral's damage is just solid in the first place. You could just see a Feral thrown in here. You could see 2 Warlocks in certain fights. If you're playing this double Hunter, double Arms comp here as well. This is also supplementing 2 Augmentation Invokers here, which you might not play in a raid setting. We'll see. It could just be 1 Dev and just other DPS is strong in the fight. These last few spots, like these flex spots here, I think if you're going to stack DPS Druid, you're stacking Balanced Druids. I don't see a reason to stack Feral Druids. They're not as high as like BM. I don't believe as high as Arms overall. There also is a world where you play a Windwalker as well. Maybe you play just like, I mean, on a non-Warlock stacking fight. This honestly might be the comp, like on a non-Lock stacking fight. Could see 2 Mages here as well. But this covers basically the entire spectrum when it comes to like raid buffs and things. You're missing like, you know, barely anything here, right? You know, this covers the most ends of the spectrum here. Arms, Warrior looking solid, BM looking solid, and you can swap in, you know, maybe if you don't want all in a fight, you can throw that, you know, Balanced Druid in, so you have 2 balance. Maybe you want second Warlock, you go bang, 2 Warlocks. Maybe you want second Mage, or maybe that Elemental Shaman sneaks into the comp too, right? Their damage, from what I've heard, is still strong, from what Petco says. A bit of a restructuring of how it's done that might have been more on an M+ setting compared to raid, but we'll see where it goes. I'm going to say tentatively, without it being a fight where you're stacking DPS profiles, this is probably where I land. I'll probably throw Feral in on the more just... I'd probably just throw Feral in. Maybe? Like over Balance, like, because Balance's lack of single target is a little awkward, but I'd start here. Double BM, double Arms, and or double Warrior, whatever. 1 Warlock, Windwalker, a Mage, a Rogue, Shaman, Druid, I mean, a Feral, Boomkin. You could just play Ellie here as well. You already have Mark from Resto Druid. 2 Aug, once again, could be 1 Aug, could be 1 Dev, just throw another DPS in there. Blood DK and Prop Paladin, obviously your Havoc Demon Hunter, rounding out your Chaos brand raid comp, so, or raid buff, right? So, it depends where it goes. I think it looks pretty good. Didn't expect BM to be stackable, or stacked. They've been on a wild ride like Warlock has been over the course of this PTR, but I'm gonna leave it here. Yeah, I think I'm relatively happy with this, but don't sleep on Enhanced, don't sleep on Balance, don't sleep on, you know, Lock stuff. Yeah, that's that. GG.